We are undertaking a really profound mission today. It's a deep dive into our current educational system. And we're not just here to criticize its shortcomings. We're exploring a radical, source-backed blueprint for a complete reform. The sources we're looking at provide this incredibly detailed critique, and then they lay out 3 core proposals. And these are designed to fundamentally reshape, individual character, worldviews, and a person's ultimate place in society.
What's fascinating here is the deliberate focus of the material. I mean, it acknowledges that birth to age 7 is fundamental, of course. But these sources are specifically interested in the educational period after age 7.
Right.
That's when character and independent thought are really supposed to solidify. And while the sources argue this is precisely where the system begins to fail, it actively prevents self-realization.
Exactly. The whole mission is moving from this kind of mechanical memorization to purpose-driven learning that's focused entirely on an individual's interest. And the sources argue that, despite presenting itself as diverse, the system really just subjects everyone to the same pattern of activities and studies.
And that, in their view, is the core challenge. The process is unifying. It's channeling the thinking process into a certain pattern.
A mold.
A mold, exactly. One that shapes people into accepting similar restrictive work schedules later in life. It's not designing thinkers. It's designing compliant workers.
So let's begin with that high-stakes critique.
Yeah.
The sources really pull no punches here. They say this forced universality leads to what they call unified thinking. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it means that any idea that deviates from or, conflicts with established facts and theories, it's often looked upon with distrust.
And hubris, they mentioned.
And even hubris, yes. Critical thinking is supposedly encouraged, but only within these very prescribed boundaries. If you don't fit the mold, your ideas are often just dismissed.
And the personal cost of this slow, unrelenting process is immense. The sources note that at the end of it, most people feel completely confused about what they actually want to do with their lives.
Yeah, they've lost most of their individuality, their uniqueness, just in the pursuit of jumping through these hoops.
So what's the mechanism of failure here?
It's rooted in the method of information transfer. The system relies almost entirely on mechanical memorization and reiteration.
Just rote learning.
Just rote learning. Simply to cover massive amounts of material quickly enough for the next standardized exam.
Okay, I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
The material claims that 99% of the knowledge acquired this way becomes meaningless and useless because it just fades from memory. Is there any specific data for that staggering number? Or is it more of a hyperbolic estimate to shock you, the reader?
It's certainly a provocative number, but the authors are using it to highlight the lack of retention and, more importantly, application. I mean, think about it. If you cram for a test on a Tuesday and you can't recall the core concept by Friday, that knowledge was useless for your long-term growth. The system rewards passing a temporary assessment, not achieving any kind of lasting wisdom or skill.
And what's driving this perpetual cycle of informational purging, I guess?
It's stress and fear.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. Fear of poor grades, fear of losing scholarships, fear of failing to find a profitable job. The entire mechanism runs on external pressure.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see why the authors describe the outcome as a society of nervous and psychologically overburdened people.
Precisely. And the goal of this entire ordeal, which often continues right into higher education, is external validation. It leads to what they dramatically call the holy grail of egoism, vanity, and false accomplishment.
Which all boils down to what? Money.
Which often boils down purely to financial success.
That's a harsh but compelling redirection of energy. Instead of allowing young people who are just starting to develop to figure out what truly drives them, we're channeling all their energy into a race for external validation.
Exactly. The goal should be finding satisfaction and, pleasure in one's work, figuring out what excites us enough to devote our lives to exploring it. The sources argue the current system actively prevents that discovery.
It turns learning into an obligation.
Not an exploration. Exactly.
So if the core mechanism of failure is this mechanical memorization, how do the sources propose we actually assess and transfer knowledge? And that brings us to the first proposed solution. A purposeful shift to learning through direct contact.
This is a fundamental change in pedagogy. The learning subject must be practically demonstrated, illustrated, explored, and tested
Got it, everyone.
by both teachers and students at all levels.
Hmm.
The idea is that no concept should start its life as a diagram on a page. It starts as a real-world object or action.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The neurological advantage of this approach is immense because it stimulates all types of memory. We're talking about visual, auditory, emotional, and critically haptic. The sense of touch and olfactory, our sense of smell.
And that's key. When you involve multiple senses, especially those primal ones like touch and smell, you create deeper, more lasting neural connections. It stops being abstract information.
And becomes an embodied memory.
An embodied memory, that's a great way to put it. Direct contact allows primal creativity to occur naturally because you're actively manipulating the material, not just reading about it.
But this shift must be challenging for some subjects, like, say, foreign languages. How does the source material suggest practicing languages without just relying on textbooks and verb drills?
The primary method they suggest for languages is student exchange programs and excursions. You practice the language in the actual environment where it's spoken.
So you get immediate fluency and context.
Exactly. And for arts and music, it means attending concerts of different genres and actually using musical knowledge to sing or play, not just studying the theory of composition.
I really appreciate that they provide these vivid, practical examples. For the sciences, instead of endless reading, students should be visiting labs or observatories.
With all safety precautions, of course.
Of course, to perform simple experiments and research themselves.
And this extends to applied knowledge, too. Studying the day-to-day implementations of math or getting in-depth, hands-on knowledge in the IT sphere. It's the immediate contact with the practical side that reveals how much something truly interests a person.
And that's what sparks the desire to create and explore further.
Right.
So reading literature and doing research, they don't vanish, but their roles change entirely.
They become resources to complement and complete the practical knowledge you've already gained through demonstration. They don't substitute for it.
They're not the entry point anymore.
No, not at all. And the sources note that while many schools do try things like field trips or labs, they're often underfunded or just overshadowed by the mountain of required reading and homework you need to pass the tests.
The priority needs to flip.
Exactly. Practical engagement first, reading second.
That leads us to their second major idea, which is reforming progression entirely. This is about education for the individual and replacing high-stakes testing with a revolutionary two-stage exam.
So the process starts normally enough. Everyone studies the fundamentals of all subjects to build a common knowledge base. But then comes the turning point.
Okay.
Once a student shows some basic creativity, problem-solving skills, and crucially, a greater interest in a specific discipline, the educational process shifts. It becomes centered entirely around that chosen subject.
This is a huge deviation from what we do now. And the sources follow this up with a truly radical proposal. There would be no penalty for leaving a class early or not attending at all.
Right. People can come and go at their convenience.
Rationale being.
The rationale is clear. Education shouldn't be a prison. It should be a site for conscious learning and self-development, respecting that everyone has a different pace. The goal is pure self-realization.
Allowing the personality to exhibit its unique inner talents and develop them to their peak form.
Yes, and alleviating that devastating external pressure from family or peers to follow a specific, profitable path.
But how do the sources address the massive infrastructure changes needed for this? I mean, the sheer logistics of having students drop in and out, choosing their own path, wouldn't that create chaos?
The sources suggest that the existing structure would be repurposed. The shift is less about building new schools and more about radically redefining the teacher's role. They become more of a flexible, available mentor.
And the whole thing is held together by the assessment method.
Exactly, which is based entirely on competency, not on attendance.
Tell us more about that assessment method. It's a two-stage process that completely moves away from rote repetition.
It does. The transition between levels is based entirely on the student's understanding and their practical skills. Stage 1 is theoretical, but it's framed as a freestyle dialogue.
A dialogue.
Yes, a conversation and a tone of mutual respect between the teacher and the student.
So instead of being grilled on dates and definitions, the conversation starts with, what excites and inspires the student in that field?
Precisely. The educator then gradually leads the dialogue toward the specific issue being examined. This process determines not just what the student knows, but how they think and what really captivates them. You get a real picture of their intellectual affinity.
Then stage 2 is the practical demonstration.
Correct. This is where the student applies all that knowledge and skill to create something new or solve a complex problem.
I like this. It sounds less like an exam and more like an apprenticeship assessment.
That's a perfect analogy. It's all about demonstrated mastery. And after the practical stage, there's a verbal follow-up.
To debrief.
To debrief, yes. They discuss mistakes made, how to fix them, and also the strong points and how to improve upon them. It gives a really clear picture of the person's skill set and interests.
And the kicker here is that people learn until they have a complete vision of that field and are ready for independent creativity.
And there are no age restrictions to the process, since everyone learns at their own tempo. And crucially, all education would be free of charge.
A system based on self-realization and respect. It demands a whole new type of communication. And that brings us to the final core proposal. The mandatory subject of emotional culture and ways to best relay information.
The sources describe this subject as fundamental for the very existence of this proposed society. Its purpose is to achieve better mutual understanding and to fully realize the emotions and thoughts guiding our minds and those around us.
So what does this all mean? The promise here is huge. It's about turning the pressure of constantly hiding our true selves into the purity and freedom that comes with just being who we are.
And to build that foundation, the curriculum involves a scientific study of empathy, cognitive, emotional, and intellectual, as well as both verbal and nonverbal communication.
So things like body language, tone of voice, even facial microexpression.
Exactly. What they mean and how they reflect what's going on inside a person.
So how do you actually learn to read nonverbal cues scientifically in a classroom? That sounds fascinating, but also potentially awkward to teach.
It's highly practical. Classmates would take turns observing one another's posture, their walk, their tone. They'd conclude what their mood is, their thoughts, and how their surroundings are affecting them. It's almost like reading a situational report on a person.
And the teacher's role.
The teacher then provides a scientific summary comparing the student observer's reading with the observed student's actual internal state.
That process helps you spot the difference between what someone is saying and what they're actually feeling.
Yes, exactly. Like spotting a micro-expression that contradicts their words. The long-term impact is profound. Students will be able to read nonverbal signs with precision to metaphorically look at the world through another's eyes.
It drives home that primary fact that we are connected.
And that we form our social environment together. It raises the level of understanding, tolerance, and collaboration.
It also teaches essential boundaries.
Yeah.
This subject helps you distinguish when you're genuinely not welcome and need to give someone space, rather than just relying on awkward social guesswork.
And the content can optionally extend into deeply fascinating areas, like exploring how to communicate with animals or diving into laws of attraction, visualization for self-realization. The goal is to eliminate so much of the unnecessary distrust that plagues our daily interactions.
So let's summarize these 3 pillars for you, the listener. First, a radical shift to practically oriented education for lasting, applicable knowledge. Second, an entire system focused on individual interests and self-realization, enforced by these competency-based 2-stage dialogue exams.
Right.
And third, the mandatory subject of emotional culture for achieving better communication and empathy.
Now, for anyone who might call this all completely unrealistic and utopian, the authors of the source material do preempt that criticism.
And their rebuttal points directly to the educational system in Finland. They note that Finland uses similar core methods.
A focus on maximizing play, substantially less homework, a later school start age, high teacher autonomy.
All of which align with these principles of practicality and respecting the individual's pace.
And the results speak for themselves, which is why we reiterate the core value from the source. Don't just trust these words, question and check the information for yourselves.
And that brings us to our final thought. If the fear of grades and the singular pursuit of money were entirely removed from the learning environment, and if the focus shifted completely to practical joy, enthusiasm, and self-realization, how drastically and how early would the timeline for truly independent creativity change for the average person?